Good evening. Honorable Ambassador P.S. Raghavan, His Excellency Mr. Nikolay Kudashev, Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary of the Russian Federation to the Republic of India, Professor Anuradha Chenoy, distinguished guests, and everyone who is joining us today. It is my honor and pleasure to welcome you on behalf of the Eurasian Foundation to the third Professor Arun Mohanty Memorial Lecture. The first lecture in this series was delivered in 2019 by Ambassador Kanwal Sibal, former Foreign Secretary of India, on the topic India-Russia Strategic Partnership in the 21st Century. The next year, Ambassador Ashok Mukherjee, former Permanent Representative of India to the United Nations, spoke on the new directions for the India-Russia Strategic Partnership. We are deeply honored that Ambassador Raghavan has given his consent to deliver the 2021 lecture. This lecture has been instituted by the Eurasian Foundation to honor late Professor Arun Mohanty, who was the founding director, a great academician, and the architect of this organization. The objective of the foundation has been to guide and assist policy making through rigorous research, periodic seminars, group discussions, and analysis. It also provides a platform to facilitate interaction of academicians with industry and policymakers. The Foundation has also been publishing a quarterly research journal called the Eurasian Report since 2005. I will now invite Professor Anuradha Chenoy to take over the proceedings of this event. Professor Chenoy is the former Dean, School of International Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University. She was director of the UGC Area Study Program on Russia and Central Asia and served as the chairperson of the Center for Russian and Central Asian Studies at JNU. Professor Chenoy, may I now request you to kindly chair the session.
Thank you very much for your introduction, Nivedita. Ambassador Raghavan, Your Excellency of Russian Ambassador to India, Mr. Kudashev, friends, Nandan, Shuman Swain, Mrs. Namita Mohanty, and everyone present. I'm delighted to be here, especially in memory of my friend and colleague, Professor Arun Mohanty, who we lost at a very untimely and young age. I remember Arun Mohanty since the early 2000s. And besides the fact that he kind of symbolizes India-Russia friendship, India-Russia relations, I would say that Arun was a wonderful human being, an excellent friend, a loyal, good-hearted person to his colleagues. He was a very kind teacher, besides being so well versed in Russia. Russia was close to his heart, just as India was. And it was his kind of calling that he would build Russia and India relations. Professor Mohanty, or Arun as we called him in the center, took the whole kind of calling of Russia very seriously. He spoke Russian like a Russian, like a native. He knew the Russian system. He understood it with great empathy. Even when many of us criticized some of Russian actions, he would always put it in a context. All of us in the center, interestingly, mostly we rejected the Western vision of Russia, the Western narratives of Russia. And we tried to evolve how we in India and in the global South should look at India. And Arun was very key to building this narrative since the 2000s. He joined in about 2005, the center, after coming back from Russia. He wrote prolifically on Russia. Sometimes we would criticize him and, in a very friendly way and tell him, okay, you give us the Russian point of view and we will give you the third world point of view. which he very happily did, but without actually, taking away from his vision that Russia was Eurasia. He understood Russia as a Eurasian concept, and he challenged, the kind of Western vision which was always being imposed, which very often demonized Russia or saw it in geostrategic methodologies. So, in a sense, I acknowledge Professor Mohanty as a wonderful individual, as a great scholar. And in this, I would be remiss if I did not recognize Mrs. Namita Mohanty, who's carried on this tradition. She's been a wonderful partner to Arun. I remember when Arun was ill, how she looked after him. And after that, she's continued with his legacy. I'm delighted that she and Suman Swain and others have worked on bringing out Arun's book, which he had started. And I'm sure they did the final editing and it's finally come out, which we will release today. And with that, I hand over to His Excellency, Mr. Nikolay Kudashev and Ambassador Raghavan to first release the book, and then Mr. Kudashev would make some remarks.
Thank you very much.
Here's the book. Mr. Kudashev, and if you would hold up the book.
Есть у нас книга? Excuse me.
That's okay.
Just give me a second, please.
Sure.
It's coming. Thank you so much. Sorry.
And now, Ambassador, if you would make some brief comments. Thank you.
My pleasure. Dear Excellencies, Mr. Raghavan and Mukherjee, dear Professor Patnaik and Swain, dear Ma'am Namita Mohanty, dear friends, there are so many familiar faces here. Nandan, good afternoon also. Highly appreciate your initiative to arrange this important event. The legacy of Professor Mohanty continues to motivate us for further research and analysis of the phenomenon of the Russian Indian. His works became our table books today. His contribution was always fundamental and at the same time future-oriented. More and more generations of students of the Russian and Eurasian studies will be based on his deep understanding and experience. No doubt, Professor Mohanty would have been proud of the contemporary developments in the Russian-Indian Special and Privileged Strategic Partnership, which is capturing new horizons amid current global and regional challenges. It would have been impossible without strong foundations of comprehensive, trusted and forward-looking nature of the Russian-Indian cooperation, which is historically grounded on mutual respect and understanding, as well as strong adherence to basic principles of interstate relations, cultivated in the United Nations Charter and international law, as well as commitment to just and equal multipolar world order. Having faced an unprecedented COVID-19 threat, we managed to mobilize all our efforts to support each other in a big way. starting with humanitarian assistance and proceeding to vaccines cooperation, which opened up a new dimension for our strategic partnership. Sputnik V and other Russian vaccines to be certified have become part of the Indian vaccination drive. Moving ahead, we are bringing our experience to the international level, including the WHO, G20, BRICS, WTO, to promote non-politicized dialogue to extend equitable access to vaccines. The Indian non-permanent membership in the United Nations Security Council provides more opportunities for coordination on all topical issues of the international agenda. Russia strongly supported the Indian presidency in the Council in August this year, while President Putin was the only P5 leader to join Prime Minister Modi during the Maritime Security Open debates. We worked together very closely during the Indian chairship in BRICS, ensuring continuity in joint endeavors to strengthen the multilateral system, ensure an inclusive post-pandemic recovery, bring a new momentum in cooperation against terror by adopting the action plan for implementation of the BRICS counterterrorism strategy. Sharing concerns and perspectives for the regional security, including with regard to the situation in Afghanistan, we prioritize the task to expand a unified agenda in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, while keeping in mind the need to consolidate the regional potential throughout the whole Eurasian space in dealing with common challenges by pushing forward the initiative of the Greater Eurasian Partnership. Bilaterally, we will continue our advanced and long-term engagement in economy, trade, investments, finance, energy, nuclear power, space, science and technology, connectivity, culture, and vibrant people-to-people ties. Our trusted defense partnership based on real technology sharing and full correspondence with the Make in India programs will be further extended, no doubt. Important, in order to continue to conform to our growing agenda, new mechanisms such as 2+2 ministerial format are being established. The Russian-Indian cooperation has become a solid global factor, and we will see its evolution at the coming BRICS and the SCO summits this September, as well as planned bilateral summit by the end of this year, which are full of new but real expectations. However, along with many preoccupations which we are currently engaged in, we should never forget our teachers, who, even if they are not physically present with us, keep motivating us. Professor Mohanty is invariably among them, as he is part of our mindset today. Thank you very much, and let such meetings become a lasting tradition. Thanks.
Thank you, Ambassador, for this extremely comprehensive, sharp, and succinct presentation. And indeed, you have summed up the essence of India-Russia relations,
Thank you,
which makes it so enduring, consistent across political ideologies and spaces. It's remarkable indeed that no matter which government is in power, the one solid relationship which carries consensus across parties, across class, across generations, across visions, and strangely, along with civil society also, is that of India-Russia relations. And I think it's a genuine people-to-people relation if you look at it. So now I have the pleasure of asking Ambassador P.S. Raghavan. He's a wonderful old hand at India-Russia and indeed in Indian foreign policy on issues of security. And I'm sure he's looking at the challenges that we are facing, both Russia and India at this conjuncture. So Ambassador, the floor is yours. Ambassador Raghavan.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Your Excellency, Ambassador Kudashev, Professor Chinoy, Mrs. Mohanty, and other friends from the Eurasian Foundation. I should say it's a very great privilege for me to be here with you for the third Arun Mohanty Memorial Lecture today. In doing so, as has already been eloquently mentioned before me, we remember a man who combined scholarship, passion, and energy in his chosen academic pursuits, and his study of the society, culture, and history of Russia and of India-Russia interactions throughout their history has actually educated and inspired Russia scholars in India over the years. And I'm sorry to say Russia scholars are a bit of a diminishing breed in India. We need to address that also. The volume that we introduced today shows us why this was so. It delves into details of interactions many of which are little known or little remembered. Of course, there are these detailed accounts of the travels and work of Afanasy Nikitin, who first explained India to Russia, or of Gerasim Lebediev, who is often considered the father of Russian Indology, though there are also other views about that. But there are also in this book very interesting accounts of the rulers of princely states in India who reached out to Russian Tsars in the 19th century, as well as anecdotes of the last Sikh king, Dilip Singh, which are quite interesting. Other than that, the book meticulously documents the course of the India-Russia relationship since our independence. Over the years, the relationship has proved its continued relevance and durability, as Ambassador Kudashev pointed out, because it is based on objective realities. And these are realities of geography, politics, and economics. Within this broad trend, and again, as Professor Mohanty has mentioned in his book, there have been and will continue to be ripples which are caused by differing analyses of circumstances, or tactical considerations, or immediate political compulsions. Arun Mohanty, of course, explores these dynamics in some depth in this book, documenting the political and economic intersections through 7 decades, and also showing how the relationship has actually reinvented itself whenever external challenges have threatened to derail it. And as Professor Chinoy pointed out, he has always been careful to project both the Indian perspective and the Russian perspective on events as they unfolded, without hesitating to criticize either one or the other. But that is very relevant because we are now going through one of those phases when the India-Russia relationship is readjusting itself to transforming geopolitical realities. Professor Mohanty's book actually presages this churn, but unfortunately his untimely passing prevented him from charting its course. Of course, COVID-19 has further distorted geopolitical calculations, which is why I suppose the topic today is frankly very topical. One often hears in international relations analysis today a sentiment similar to the warnings that you keep hearing on the stock market, that past performance is not a guarantee of future success. This may be so, but it has often been used by those who want to say that the India-Russia relationship has outgrown it. Well, it is true that history or emotion should not govern relations. I think we need to remember that historical experiences that have current relevance do need to be remembered, and they need to be built upon. One highlight of India-USSR relations, the precursor to India-Russia relations, was the political support of the USSR in international forums on India's core interests. Its crucial vetoes of resolutions in the UN Security Council between 1957 and 1962 safeguarded India's interests in Jammu and Kashmir. And at a critical phase in the military operations in our war with Pakistan in 1971, if the Soviet Union had not thrice vetoed resolutions seeking to stop India's actions, the political map of South Asia may have been a little different today. Now, of course, this close partnership was a product of the geopolitical realities of the time. Geopolitical realities which also resulted in the Indo-Soviet Treaty of 1971, whose 50th anniversary on 9th of August passed almost unnoticed, except for a function that our embassy hosted in Moscow. As our ambassador to Russia noted in his message on the occasion, this treaty did not signal a military alliance. On the contrary, it strengthened the basis of India's strategic autonomy and its capacity for independent action. Among its various outcomes was the close defense cooperation that has grown into the extraordinarily broad-based defense engagement that we have today. The political and economic links were also reinforced by what was quite the political and economic links were reinforced by what was for that period an extraordinary level of popular connection. Tens of thousands of Indian students at universities across the USSR, the extensive use of cheaply priced Soviet publications in university textbooks in science and engineering. I studied some of them as well. And the enormous popularity of Hindi films, music, and dance forms. And that is something that actually continues to this day. It's quite remarkable. As ambassador to Russia just a few years ago, I could go to virtually any province in that vast country and see local artists giving Indian classical dance performances, or of course Bollywood dance numbers, and singing songs from Raj Kapoor films, word for word. And this is from people of the age group of about 45 or so, many of whom have never seen Raj Kapoor, but learnt these lyrics from their parents, who were of Raj Kapoor's generations. Going on to the next step of the India-Russia interaction. That was the new millennium, which sparked a resurgence. After a bit of a hiatus, you can say, in the 1990s, the new millennium sparked a resurgence in post-Cold War bilateral relations. The strategic partnership, which was announced during President Putin's first visit to India in 2000, articulated the aspiration of both countries to work for a multipolar world order. And it set in motion a progressive broad-basing and intensification of cooperation. The Russia-India-China ministerial dialogue was an articulation of that desire for multipolarity. Similarly, BRIC, the Brazil, Russia, India, China grouping, was a grouping formed primarily to supplement the efforts of G20 and other fora for democratization of the global economic and financial architecture. But the most important and lasting impact of the 2000 rejuvenation of India-Russia relations was on India, on the defense cooperation, which was a major impulse, for which a major impulse was given during President Putin's visit. India's purchases involved all arms of the armed forces, Su-30 aircraft, a range of helicopters, T-50 tanks, T-90 tanks, artillery, armored vehicles, missile systems, stealth frigates, submarines, just to take a broad sample. And the cooperation also, this is something that is not as well known, developed a number of pretty unique templates. Everyone knows, of course, the joint venture BrahMos, which started with manufacturing of an anti-ship supersonic missile system, which was designed in Russia, but it has since developed in India sophisticated missile systems for different platforms for Army, Navy, and Air Force. Russia's weapons platforms have been designed and altered to meet Indian specifications. Russian companies have collaborated with foreign companies to make technology insertions in the platforms to be delivered to India. And Russia has always been willing to find ways around external restrictions. I don't want to give specific examples of that, but I think many of you know examples of it already. So the consequent reality of that, from that, is that Soviet or Russian origin weapons and equipment form the backbone of the Indian military capability even today. In qualitative terms, you can talk about a 60 to 70, in quantitative terms, you can talk about a 60 to 70% content. This really means that for the next several decades, Russian involvement in their operational serviceability or in their repair, maintenance, upgrades will be required. It also means, this means therefore a continuing defense engagement. The latest arms transfer register of SIPRI, the Stockholm International Institute for Peace and Research, it records that in spite of all that has been said about the dilution of India's, diversification of India's military acquisitions, in the last 5 years, 2016 to 20, Russia supplied 49% of India's arms imports. It's a proportion that has been falling. It has fallen from 80 to 70 to 60 over decades. But 49 is a pretty large number. And if you compare the next largest supplier, which is France, it had only an 18% share. Israel was third at 13%. And what is more, SIPRI estimates on the basis of existing orders that India has placed that this is a proportion that is going to increase. So if you look at the narrative about the expansion of India's, or rather the diversification of India's defense acquisition, yes, India is seeking to diversify its defense acquisitions. India does not want also to put all its eggs in one basket. But this is a process that is happening in a very structured way. It is a process where, again, the Russian partnership provides an excellent bargaining chip. It can be leveraged to increase benefit from other partnerships, whether it is in technology or whether it is in Make in India content. No country has shown greater willingness to localize production in India, to internalize the concept of Make in India in terms of transfers of technology as Russia has done. So even here, even as we move out of a total dependence on Russia, the partnership with Russia is of great help. Look at another sector, energy. Again, a sector of expanding India-Russia cooperation. And again, not so well known. Since 2000, Indian companies have invested something like $15 billion in hydrocarbon projects in Russia. And they're mostly, of course, in Siberia and the Russian Far East. From all accounts, one reads today that further projects are in the pipeline amounting to about $2 to $3 billion. And then the government of India, which recently released its draft Arctic policy, has clearly indicated the interest for greater Indian presence in this region through participation in renewable and non-renewable energy projects. What has also gone largely unnoticed is the significant Russian investment in India in this sector. In 2017, a consortium led by Rosneft, the Russian oil major, acquired India's second largest oil refinery, which actually added about 20% to Rosneft's global refining capacity. It also acquired downstream retail fuel business, which makes it actually India's largest private fuel retailer. And this, by the way, was Russia's largest foreign investment abroad, amounting to something like $12.9 billion. And of course, it was India's largest inward investment as well. To another segment of energy, which is nuclear energy. When the multinational nuclear suppliers group agreed in 2008 to permit international civil cooperation, civil nuclear cooperation with India, Russia was the first through the open door. And by the way, it still remains the only foreign player in this space. Building on earlier links, of course, which we had during the Soviet times. So we now have 6 nuclear power plants of 1,000 megawatt capacity in Kudankulam in Tamil Nadu. 2 are in operation, 2 more are in advanced stages of construction. And recently, I think the concrete was poured for another 2 units. And an action plan was recently, a couple of years ago, an action plan was rolled out for future cooperation in nuclear energy, which talks about another 6 plants of 1,200 megawatts in a new site, and which includes a greater localization content. Of course, it's important to remember also that Russia's collaboration in nuclear energy also includes credit at very attractive rates, and importantly, uranium supply for the life cycle of these plants. It's very important for a country like India, whose uranium resources are somewhat meager. Another area of cooperation, which has now, in fact, acquired momentum in recent times, and COVID actually gave it an impetus. It is India's search for diversification of critical minerals, both for industry and for strategic applications. COVID actually focused our mind on the importance of diversification of supplies of these elements. Now, Russia is home to about 30% of the world's natural resources, and obviously provides opportunities for sourcing and investment, which our bilateral relationship will help in promoting. And there is already a consortium of Indian public sector companies which is present in Russia, scouting around for viable projects. Going further to the more recent developments, and Ambassador Kudashev mentioned this as well, a very important decision has been taken by the President and the Prime Minister to set up a 2+2 mechanism for foreign and defense ministers to institutionalize consultations on major bilateral and international matters. When our External Affairs Minister was recently in Moscow, that was last month, I think, the 2 countries agreed to restart, very importantly, the negotiations which were interrupted by COVID for a free trade agreement with the Eurasian Economic Union, which of course includes Russia, Kazakhstan, Belarus, Armenia, and Kyrgyzstan. Some agreements, the External Affairs Minister announced that some agreements are being finalized in the Russian Far East under the $1 billion Indian line of credit that was announced during Prime Minister Modi's visit to Vladivostok in 2019. Also, in his speech at the prominent Russian think tank IMEMO, the External Affairs Minister talked about possibilities of new partnerships, including in trilateral formats, a very interesting formulation, and in connectivity through the Northern Sea route, as well as the Chennai-Vladivostok maritime corridor. So these are the extensive interactions on the bilateral plane through history, developing from history up to the present day. Now, if you go beyond the bilateral engagement to the Eurasian landmass, which is between India, Russia, and China, there are further shared interests. In 2017, India joined the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which was then including Russia, China, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and now, of course, includes India and Pakistan. Sandwiched between Russia and, our membership of this Shanghai Cooperation Organization obviously is meant to further our interests in this strategic region. It is a region which is strategically important for India, as it borders, as we all know, Iran, Afghanistan, and Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. It is today dominated by Russia and China, and India feels it is important for it to be present in the region to further its interests alongside Russia and China. Central Asia, of course, is also the source of strategically important resources. And as the countries in the region seek to increase their autonomy of action from Russia and China, they would also welcome strengthening connections with India, with which, of course, we have they have close links. They have long-standing economic and cultural links from the time of the Silk Road. And there is a certain India-Russia conjunction in the Indian presence in Central Asia, which I don't need to spell out very explicitly. But of course, the other aspect is if you have to be present in that region, if we have to be present in that region effectively, connectivity is very important. India's direct overland route to Central Asia is, of course, blocked by Pakistan and Afghanistan for both geographical as well as political and security reasons. And therefore, the international north-south transport corridor was envisaged as a multimodal trade corridor from India's west coast to Iran, and then onwards to Central Asia, with, of course, with spurs to Afghanistan, to Russia, and onward connection to Europe as well. India has developed a container terminal in Iran's Chabahar port, and it's also committed to establishing a 610-kilometer rail link from Chabahar to Zahedan, which will be a bridgehead to Afghanistan and Central Asia. Again, there is a very strong reciprocal interest from the Central Asian countries, this corridor, because for them as well, this would be the Chabahar would be the shortest route to the sea. India has also joined the Ashgabat Agreement to establish a seamless multimodal transport and transit corridor through Central Asia to synchronize with the other regional transport corridors, which will include the INSTC. Of course, connecting to Afghanistan is the immediate spin-off. It provides Afghanistan an alternative to the dependence on Pakistan and Karachi port for its transit to the sea. But the INSTC has much broader economic and strategic spin-offs. It offers not only India, but all of South, Southeast, and East Asia a cost-effective trade route to Central Asia, and not only to Central Asia, but also to Russia and Europe. It avoids both China and the lengthy sea route. For India, the reduction in the freight and transit times could mean that our trade to Eurasia can really jump up from something like $10 to $12 billion today to somewhere in the region of $200 billion, according to estimates preliminary estimates. And trade with Russia, which in fact has been the Achilles heel of our relationship for decades, and which our leaders from time to time regularly express the determination to give a boost to, the INSTC will automatically give it a quantum jump. So this is where we stand today. if you look at it in terms of a bilateral engagement, and if you look at an engagement regionally between India and Russia. A broad canvas and in important sectors. And therefore, we need to see why, despite this apparent success, there have been so many murmurs about the state of health of the relationship and serious concerns expressed about its strategic sustainability. Well, the broader international environment has caused this. As the India-China confrontation across the line of control dragged on in 2020, concerns about the nature of the Russia-China strategic partnership resurfaced in India. And you heard influential sections of the Indian media and academia suggesting that, India should now make a strategic choice of an unequivocal alignment with the US as the only viable course to meet the India-Chinese challenge. This judgment, of course, was informed by a perception that Russia, weakened by Western sanctions and a flagging economy, was too beholden to China to be of any help to India vis-a-vis China. And to add grist to the mill, there were a few statements. One which was quoted extensively was President Putin's response to a Chinese correspondent that defense cooperation between Russia and China was developing very rapidly. And he apparently said also that while a military alliance with China was not on the cards, it was not inconceivable either. Around the same time, the Russian foreign minister also publicly expressed concern about India's Indo-Pacific engagement, suggesting that it may be leading to quasi-alliance with, a quasi-alliance with the US. And when added to all this, we saw the postponement of the annual summit of 2020, the very first time since 2000 that the sequence of annual summits was broken. People put 2 and 2 together and got much more than 22 to say that the relationship really is on the rocks. The fact of the matter is that the leaders had agreed in advance that the summit would be held after the COVID situation permitted physical rather than virtual interaction. Now, of course, this situation has been caused by the development of India's relationships with other countries as well as Russia's relationships with other countries. India's relationship with the US, of course, came front and center. It's important to note that this relationship grew from 2000 onwards, and its rapid surge was actually contemporaneous with the surge in India-Russia relations. The exclusivity, this was the result of the post-Cold War situation where countries were freed from the shackles of the Cold War and developed their network of relationships independent of the Cold War straitjacket. Now, this obviously meant, objectively, that the exclusivity of India's relations with Russia was eroding. But again, this actually accorded with the thrust for multipolarity that both countries said that they were aspiring for. The flow of weapons platforms and military technologies from Russia did not stop. It, in fact, continued apace. Though defense imports from the US increased sharply, they did not include the most sophisticated weapons platforms. There was a reason for that. There were various foundational agreements that took a long time to finalize. But also it is important to note that during this period of the India-US relationship, Russia and the US were in close contact with each other. In fact, also, I remember President Putin once telling our Prime Minister that, look, I support your efforts to free India from nuclear apartheid. We support you completely, but you need to talk to the US because the US will be the decisive influence there. And also in 2002, you'll remember that when the standoff between India and Pakistan took place, there was this, the correspondence or rather communication between President Bush and President Putin about how they could together see that the standoff between India and Pakistan could be, the tensions could be loosened. So there was, it was a period when the India-US relationship did not cause as much angst in Russia as it did later on. Now, India's other bilateral relationship, of course, is that of, which also has an impact on India-Russia relations and which figured in the recent narrative during COVID, is the one with China. Again, in the immediate aftermath of the end of the Cold War, there were very encouraging moves towards a rapprochement between India and China. And the period, if you look at it from 1998 to 2005, was a period between Rajiv Gandhi's visit in 1988 and, sorry, 1988 and 2005, between Rajiv Gandhi's visit to China and 2005 when the political parameters for settlement of the India-China border were decided. The relationship actually was on even keel, and when in 2003 special representatives were appointed to look at the boundary issue from a political perspective, things looked, well, if not rosy, at least encouraging. And then, of course, we went downhill from there to check visas for J&K citizens, and then check visas for citizens from Arunachal Pradesh, then the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, the nuclear Doklam, the nuclear suppliers group differences with China, and then Ladakh. Now, as India-US relations gathered steam in the latter part of the in the last decade, in the decade before this, the US-Russia relationship went into free fall. Russia's relations with the US and its allies, which were already deteriorating from 2008 onwards, reached near breakdown in 2014 after the annexation of Crimea, or the accession of Crimea, whichever side you want to be looking from. The Russia-West divide sharpened, and ever new controversies came up, leading to something which we see today, or which we saw till yesterday, if you talk about the period before the Biden-Putin summit, a Cold War-like situation of dialogue freeze, economic sanctions, and even military confrontation through their proxies across geographies, from Ukraine to Syria to Afghanistan. Now, India did not join the Western economic sanctions against Russia, even when the more potent threat of the US legislation, CATSA, came in, which essentially provided for closing the US market to any country involved in significant defense transactions with Russia. The air defense system S-400, of which much has been talked about, fitted this description. But India went ahead with this deal. The other aspect was, as India-China relations were going downhill, Russia-China relations started a sharp upswing, with political cooperation on international issues, intensified defense cooperation, joint military exercises, broad-based economic cooperation, which included areas like nuclear energy, aerospace, transportation, and cooperation in space. So these are the dynamics of various international relationships, which cause comment of the kind that I mentioned before, and which really create questions in the public about where India-Russia relations are going, and whether there is a strategic content, and whether the strategic content of the India-Russia relationship is sustainable. But I think we need to put all these developments and concerns into a perspective. We need to keep in mind that they result from each of our countries pursuing our national interests in the specific context of the external environment, which is specific to them. The post-Cold War world actually is characterized by countries pursuing multiple interests in different sectors and geographies and trying to optimize their political and economic presence in a world order which is still in the making. So exclusive of relationships, as I said, does not fit into this scheme. So the India-US strategic partnership has an important mutuality. It furthers a number of bilateral interests. It furthers India's strategic interests in the maritime domain, but its impact is far less in the continental domain. And our interest in the continental domain, the Eurasian landmass, which I talked about, it involves a largely different network of relationships, and Russia plays a very important role in this. As, of course, I have elaborated in the earlier part of this lecture. Also, Russia's interest in remaining a great power, which President Putin has often expressed, in a multipolar world order, should similarly drive it to balance its relationships so that it furthers the mutuality of interest with each of its relationships. Now, on the Indo-Pacific itself, which has caused so much noise, so much friction, so much comment, I think the Indo-Pacific is a region where actually India's interest in the continental domain with Russia and India's interest in the maritime domain can intersect. And this has been the subject of recent India-Russia discussions in order to clarify our respective positions. A cooperative order in the Indo-Pacific region is as much in Russia's interest as it is in ours. The initiative to strengthen Indian presence in the Russian Far East and for the Vladivostok-Chennai Maritime Corridor, and this extraordinary initiative that the Prime Minister took, this Act Far East, where he actually pledged a line of credit of $1 billion for development of projects in the Russian Far East. It's meant to drive home this message that we can be together to build a cooperative order in the Indo-Pacific, where Russia has an interest independently in promoting a cooperative order. And this, of course, is entirely in consonance with the President Putin's vision of a greater Eurasian partnership that seeks to draw countries of Eurasia into an economic partnership on an equal basis, as he has stressed, with no country dominating it. And now you may have noticed very recently in Russia's National Security Strategy 2021, the Greater Eurasian Partnership has now been elevated, has been given a pride of place in Russia's national security strategy. Therefore, you know, if you look at it, we have exactly the same interest as what our External Affairs Minister has often been saying. A multipolar world should include a multipolar Asia, and India and Russia have a common interest in this multipolar Asia. In his recent speech at IMEMO, External Affairs Minister Jaishankar also countered some of the prevailing narratives about Russia and India, which I mentioned before as well. He talked about Russia's inherent strength as a Eurasian and Euro-Pacific power. And it's, if you'll give me a minute. Yeah. He said that, I quote, Russia's inherent strength as a Eurasian and Euro-Pacific power and its long-standing global status makes it unmistakably critical to the world order. He went on to say that Russia has regularly demonstrated an ability to influence outcomes across regions and issues, and that its salience in domains that matter, like energy and technology, is particularly noteworthy. And he did say also that India considers Russia's presence in the Indo-Pacific to be very, very important geopolitically. The leaders of our two countries, of course, have publicly projected their commitment to the relationship. They have demonstrated their personal chemistry. They have confirmed repeatedly the strategic content of the relationship. They have also actively encouraged a broad-based cooperation architecture to ensure that mutual stakes in the relationship would incentivize each partner to be sensitive to the core interests of the other. In this, I think we need to note also that some practical aspects which need to be attended to for the development of the India-Russia relationship along the most optimum lines. The recent developments have actually shown the reality that the India-Russia relationship in many ways operates largely on the template of the Cold War days. What I mean by that is that the dominant theme in India-Russia interaction is government to government. We need to get our business communities to engage more directly, because the elaborate government to government economic dialogue architecture does not actually meet the realities of today. Now, big business groups, both in India and Russia, with very few exceptions, have actually kept their business away from each other. They cite difficult business conditions, they cite sanctions, even though most sanctions against Russia, most Western sanctions against Russia are not secondary sanctions in non-defense domains. And they're basically currency, geography, or sector specific. So they offer plenty of scope for commercial interaction. A fact that Western countries have grasped, but Indian companies have not. The problem, of course, is that of lack of information. Most Indian business do not have adequate information about opportunities in Russia, and a very similar ignorance prevails in Russia as well. Both countries source their information of each other largely from foreign English language media. We need much better public communication if we are to make full use of the bilateral opportunities. And of course, the generation in Russia that I mentioned before, that can sing Bollywood numbers with lyrics, is passing on. And as in fact, the generation in India that grew up on cheap university textbooks from the Soviet Union. Russia has a proud tradition of scholarship in Indology that is also dying out as funding for this pursuit is drying up. So India-Russia relations have to adjust to the reality that educational and cultural exchanges can no longer be sustained entirely by governments. We need to find mechanisms to correct this. So, in the present global environment, a wide network of international relationships has increased India's room for maneuver in international affairs. Russia's multi-vector foreign policy pursues similar objectives. Now, there is a popular perception that this multi-alignment dilutes the strength of this India-Russia partnership. This is not a valid perception. Both because today's international engagements are not zero-sum games, and because some of the ground realities of the India-Russia relationship remain unchanged. That is why I said that history is not entirely relevant in this particular relationship. At the same time, again, our External Affairs Minister often says that today's foreign policies require the maxim convergence with many, but congruence with none. The importance of the convergence with different countries varies, and the convergence with India and Russia remain very, very significant. And of course, instead of looking at relationships in the template of alignment and alliances, there is a very interesting template which was suggested unexpectedly by a US think tank. In 2015, the US Council on Foreign Relations actually set up a task force to see why India-US relationship was not actually progressing at the speed at which the objective realities permitted it to proceed. And they came to the conclusion that, look, the US keeps looking at countries as potential allies, but that is not a valid template for today's world, and particularly with India. And so what they suggested was, instead of an alliance model, you should treat relations with India as a joint venture. A joint venture which would not preclude other partnerships of either party, but which would maximize the interests of both parties in the areas in which their interests coincide. If you look at the India-Russia relationship, I think this is the most appropriate template for the India-Russia relationship in today's world. They have shared geopolitical, defense, economic, and energy interests, which I mentioned. Each may also have conflicts of interest, which flow from obligations of other partnerships. They will need to manage them through bilateral reconciliation, keeping in view that their overriding interests, overriding convergences are more important than any temporary or regional divergences that they may have. So in short, India-Russia relations have now to emerge from the assumptions of the past and focus on the realities of the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Raghavan. This was indeed a marvelous lecture because not only did it look at a broad theoretical frame, it provided a template by which one should understand not just India-Russia relations, but geostrategic relations overall. Besides that, you covered the entire gamut of India-Russia relations, not just the political, but the economic, but also going into, these were all embedded in history as well as contemporary relations. So you brought us from the past, connected the dots to the present, brought in the whole issues and also the weaknesses that you addressed of the business community, the need to look into better communications, the people to people, the cultural aspects. So really thank you for this marvelous lecture. And I would really recommend that the Eurasian Foundation, indeed, besides putting it up on YouTube so that our students can keep looking at it and keep it as a permanent reference point, which is possible in today's world, luckily. But I would also really recommend that the Eurasian Foundations, along with the Russian Embassy, actually publish this lecture as an occasional paper and circulate it widely. Because as Ambassador Raghavan put it, a lot of the geostrategic community looks at geostrategy as a chessboard and doesn't go further beyond it. And therefore, they tend to very often misguide the public and the narrative on the depth of these relationships. So thank you once again for this. And now I would break the protocol or the program which was given to me and ask some eminent people who are and friends who are here just to make very brief comments. And one of them is Nandan Unikrishnan. So Nandan, if you're here, can you make a brief comment for a few minutes?
Thank you, Anuradha. Thank you. It is an unexpected honor to speak at such an event. Before I make any comments on Ambassador Raghavan's brilliant exposition, absolutely, sir. I am so impressed, I just don't have words. I would like to say a few words about Arun. I knew Arun from the late 1980s when we as a PTI TV team first went to do a film on Gorbachev. That is when I first met Arun. And even that time when, we had just barely met, he already was so helpful to us in telling us who we could interview, he called people to speak to the crew. And I must say that his inputs and his insights were most valuable. Of course, the period when I really cooperated and got to know Arun was when Jyoti, my wife and I, we were posted in Moscow as journalists from 91 to 95. And those were the most difficult times in Russia. The Soviet Union had just collapsed. And without guidance from Arun, I think Jyoti and I would have found it very, very difficult to literally survive in those difficult circumstances. So I owe a lot to Arun, and there is no doubt that his loss, and Ambassador Raghavan has referred to that, was a big blow to the already dwindling numbers of Russian scholars in India. With that, I would like to also endorse what Professor Anuradha Chinoy said. I think this lecture by Ambassador Raghavan must be published. I completely endorse it. But over and above that, I have a personal request, if it's possible for the Eurasian Foundation to provide me at least with a transcript of this lecture, because this is a template that saves me all my work for whatever little my career have left. I have a ready-made Xerox of whatever I have to say on India-Russia relations. But I will want to endorse another couple of points that were made by Ambassador Raghavan. One is that we are going through troubling times, and our relationships cannot be constant. You cannot build and say that 1971 is the pinnacle, and so everything must resemble 1971. We are in 2021 and not in 1971. And therefore, we need to adjust to 2021. And I think Ambassador Raghavan brought out well the various pulls and pressures on both countries to pursue their interests. And I think this is also very important, a lesson for India also, watching how Russia, after 91, when it was literally a broken country, to rebuild to where it is today, there is a lesson in how you must invest in your own capacities, in your own strengths, to develop an attraction for the rest of the world as a strong, reliable partner. And the final point I would love to endorse repeatedly is the need. After all, more than 80% of India's economy resides in the private sector. And if that private sector does not get involved in the relationship with Russia, it is going to be a very, very difficult proposition ahead. Even the INSTC, which is so passionately referred to, I also believe that it can be a game changer. But unless the private sector arrives, it will not be a commercially viable project. And therefore, I don't know how it can be done, but the involvement of the private sector in the economic relationship is absolutely vital. Thank you, Anuradha, for giving me this opportunity to speak. Thank you once again. Namaste ji.
Thank you, Nandan. There is some space for question answer, but I don't see any questions in the chat box. But there is a lot of appreciation, Ambassador Raghavan, of your lecture, undoubtedly correct. I think I'd hand this back to Dr. Swain, and maybe to Madam Namita Mohanty to make some concluding remarks. So thank you very much for having me chair this meeting. So I'm handing it back to Dr. Sumant Swain and to Mrs. Mohanty. Mrs. Mohanty?
Thank you so much.
Can I say something?
Please.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. As we end today's event, on behalf of Eurasian Foundation, I would like to thank you all for joining the third Professor Arun Mohanty Memorial Lecture. We would like to extend a very hearty vote of thanks to all the distinguished guests for gracing the event and sharing their far-reaching knowledge with us. We are very much thankful to His Excellency, Ambassador Mr. Nikolay Kudashev, for releasing Professor Mohanty's last book and giving his precious time for this evening from his busy schedule. Thank you very much, sir. We also express our sincere gratitude to Ambassador P.S. Raghavan for accepting our invitation as the speaker for this memorial lecture. We feel so fortunate to have an eminent expert like you, sir, who has given a tremendous speech on Indo-Russian relationship. Thank you very much, sir. We would also like to express our special thanks to Mr. Unikrishnan. It's a really nice thing to have you here in our event. We would like to express our sincere thanks to Professor Anuradha Chennai for chairing this event and for delivering such a heartfelt tribute to Arun Mohanty. Thank you, ma'am. I'm personally thankful to Sumant Swine, Dr. Nivedita Kapoor, and Dr. Subrat Behra for their sincere effort and special support to make this memorial lecture a grand success. Thank you very much. Last but not the least, Eurasian Foundation would like to extend its gratitude to our friends, well-wishers, and esteemed academicians who joined us today from India and across the border. All of you made this evening unforgettable. Thank you all. We had a wonderful evening. Namaskar. So, Sumant.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sumam. Actually, we'll just going to conclude. If anybody wants to anything, Dr. Larissa wants to say something, I think. Dr. Larissa, you want to say something?
One moment, please. I'm very glad to greet you, the organizers of the conference, the ambassador of Russian Federation, all the lecturers, respected Mr. Swain, Namita Mohanty, my best regards. Namaste. I'm very glad to take part in these annual conferences which were devoted to the late Professor Arun Mohanty. It was the best time for me, my start, my first years of working in India under the guidance of the Arun Mohanty. So I will never forget him, his works, his books, his family, almost native for me, Namita Mohanty. Namaste once again. So thank you very much. Indo-Russian relations, scientific and personal, are very important for everybody of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Namaste.
Professor Pandey, sir, you want to say something, sir? Sanjay Pandey, sir, please, sir.
The connection is not very good.
Yes, thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes.
Sumant,
Yes, sir.
what
You are
about my
here.
camera? Is it working?
Yes, sir. It's working, sir.
All right. So, all right. So, thank you very much for organizing this lecture. Ambassador Raghavan was eloquent, and some of the issues that he touched have great bearing on the present situation in this part of the world. Professor Mohanty, of course, was a scholar whose scholarship was beyond comparison. I remember sometimes whenever I needed any inputs about India-Russia relations or the current developments and situation in Russia, I would straight away go to Professor Mohanty, and I had a ready-made encyclopedia available to be consulted anytime that I wanted. About India-Russia relations, I would say that these two countries, although in the present correlation of forces, they are not seen on the same side, but there is something enduring about their partnership. Not just that, both of them are civilization states, both are non-Western countries, states, civilizations, and both have aspiration to be an autonomous and independent global player. I believe in the long run, these two countries, whom I described as non-West, are bound to come together because there is so much on which their worldviews and interest match. So therefore, I am a strong votary of this very important historical partnership. I thank Madam Namita Mohanty. I thank Professor Anuradha Chinoy, Ambassador Raghavan and Sumant for organizing this talk. And of course, I appreciate greatly the lecture by Ambassador Kudashev. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much, sir. Dr. Santosh Mishra, sir, do you want to say something? Yes, sir.
Thank you. I greet both the ambassadors, and we are very thankful to Mr. Raghavan. I stay in Moscow, and many aspects, of course, we were not knowing, and it was a very informative lecture. And now we have started telling things, the reality about the relationship. Yes, as it was told, the private sector of both countries has to come closer. Then only we can triple our turnover, what was planned 3 years back. And talking about Professor Arun Mohanty, he had started, he united all the Orias in Moscow, and it was 26 years back we had formed AROS, All Russia Odia Samaj, and I would like to tell in this forum that we are continuing that tradition, and all the Odias are united and we are functioning over here. We remember Arun Mohanty. Thanks to Namita Mohanty, we are in touch, and thanks to this forum. And I would love to get a copy of this lecture. Thank you.
Definitely, we'll do that. Anybody wants to make any comments? Dr. Nikita, you want to say something? His Excellency Ambassador, you want to say something, sir?
I do really appreciate this meeting and the presence of the outstanding friends of Russia and the outstanding brains of India. I also dream about having a printed version of the lecture, of the wonderful lecture of Professor Raghavan, and I dream of such meetings becoming a tradition and to continue for the future as a platform of exchange of views and as a feedback for our establishments. And once again, thank you. It's good to meet you. It's good to meet you at the screen for now, and it would be exceptional to meet you in the physical way soon, I hope. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, His Excellency. We will do that. Thank you so much, sir. Mr. P.S. Raghavan, actually, you have given the time, and really it's a very insight you have given after a long time. We just had the opportunity to listen to these things. Thank you so much, sir. Very short period you are giving this to your consent. We are very grateful for your help and support always, and your blessings, sir. Definitely your lecture will be published, and definitely will just verify after your approval. We will just publish this lecture, sir.
Yes.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Ambassador Kudashev, thank you. And bye-bye.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Ambassador Kudashev.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.